The cold bit through Marcus Reed's scrubs like 1,000 tiny knives as he pushed open the heavy steel door leading to the hospital's back alley. It was 11:47 on a December night, so frigid that his breath formed thick clouds in the air, and the steam from the nearby vents created an eerie fog that clung to the ground. His 12-hour shift had stretched into 14, then 16, and every muscle in his body screamed for rest. He was taking out the biohazard waste, a task that was technically not his responsibility, but the orderly had called in sick, and someone had to do it. That was Marcus's life now. Someone had to do it, and that someone was always him. He was halfway to the dumpster when he heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound that didn't belong in the harsh symphony of the city at night. It was the gentle crinkle of paper, deliberate and careful, accompanied by the barely audible hum of a child's voice. Marcus froze, his hand tightening on the red biohazard bag. His first thought was rats, but rats didn't hum. His second thought was that he was finally losing his mind from exhaustion. Then he saw her. She was small, hunched behind the dumpster in a space so narrow he wouldn't have noticed her if not for the sound. The girl couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old, with tangled dark hair that hung past her shoulders and a threadbare coat that was at least 3 sizes too large. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped Marcus cold. It was what she was doing. She was wrapping presents, not real presents, pieces of trash, a broken doll with one arm missing, an empty perfume box, a torn magazine with the cover barely hanging on, a cracked picture frame. Each item was being meticulously wrapped in old newspaper with a concentration so intense that she hadn't even noticed him standing there. Her small fingers worked with surprising skill, folding the corners with precision, securing each package with strips of duct tape that she pulled from a roll wedged between 2 bricks. Marcus stood motionless, the biohazard bag forgotten in his hand. The girl finished wrapping the doll, set it carefully on top of a small pile of similarly wrapped items, and reached for the next treasure, a dented toy car with only 3 wheels. She inspected it closely, turning it over in her hands with the seriousness of a jeweler examining a diamond. Then she began to wrap it. The scene was so surreal, so heartbreakingly bizarre, that Marcus felt his throat tighten. He cleared it softly, not wanting to startle her. The girl's hands stilled instantly. Her head snapped up, and for a moment their eyes met. Hers were dark, too old for her young face, and filled with a wary calculation. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just watched him, her body tensed like a spring, ready to bolt if he made the wrong move. "Hey," Marcus said, his voice gentler than it had been in months. He slowly lowered the biohazard bag to the ground, keeping his bayrake's hands visible. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The girl said nothing. Her eyes flicked to the wrapped packages beside her, then back to him. A protective instinct flashed across her face. "I work here," Marcus continued, gesturing to his hospital ID badge clipped to his scrub pocket. "I'm a nurse. I was just taking out the trash." He paused, searching for the right words. "What are you doing out here? It's freezing." Still, she remained silent, but she didn't run. That alone told Marcus something important. This wasn't a kid who panicked easily. He took a small step closer, moving slowly, the way he would approach a frightened animal. "Those are some really nice presents you're wrapping there," he said, nodding toward her pile. "Special occasion?" The girl's jaw tightened. She looked down at her work, then back up at him. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady, with a matter-of-fact tone that was somehow more devastating than tears would have been. "It's for the other kids at the shelter," she said. "For Christmas." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. "The shelter?" "Riverside," she said, as if that explained everything. "There are 17 kids there right now, 18 if you count the baby, but babies don't really need presents. These are for the older ones, the ones who don't get picked for the adoption days." Marcus crouched down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. The cold from the pavement seeped through his scrubs, but he barely noticed. "You're wrapping trash," he said gently, not as an accusation, but as an observation. "It's not trash," she corrected him, a flash of indignation in her eyes. "This doll just needs a new arm. I can make one from a stick and some fabric, and this car only needs 1 wheel. I can use a bottle cap, and this frame," she held up the cracked glass rectangle, Just needs the picture put back in. Someone threw away a family photo. That's sad. But I can fix it and give it to someone who needs a family to look at." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at this tiny, filthy, freezing child who was sitting in an alley behind a dumpster, wrapping garbage with the reverence most people reserved for jewelry, and he realized he was looking at something extraordinary. Not tragedy, though there was plenty of that, but dignity. Pure, unshakable dignity in the face of a world that had clearly given her nothing. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then seemed to decide he wasn't a threat. "Nora." "Nora, I'm Marcus." He extended his hand, and after a moment she shook it. Her hand was ice cold and impossibly small in his. "Nora, it's about 20 degrees out here. You can't stay out here all night." "I'm fine," she said, pulling her hand back and returning to her wrapping. "I've got my coat, and the vent over there blows warm air every 15 minutes. Have you eaten today?" She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. Marcus's mind raced. He should call social services. That was the protocol. But it was nearly midnight on one of the coldest nights of the year, and he knew exactly what would happen. She'd be taken to an emergency placement, probably separated from whatever few belongings she had, processed through a system that was already overwhelmed during the holidays. He'd seen it before. The thought made him sick. "Listen," he said, making a decision that his exhausted brain told him was probably stupid, but his heart insisted was right. "The hospital cafeteria is about to throw out a bunch of food. They do it every night. Sandwiches, soup, stuff like that. It's just going to go in the trash anyway. You want to help me carry some of it to my car? I could use an extra set of hands." Nora looked at him with those two old eyes, clearly trying to determine if this was a trap. "Why would you need help carrying food to your car?" "Because I have a 6-year-old son at home who eats like he's got a hollow leg, and I'm always looking for ways to save money on groceries," Marcus said. It wasn't entirely a lie. "Plus, my back is killing me after this shift. I could really use the help." He was giving her an out, a way to accept help without accepting charity. He saw the moment she understood this, saw the subtle shift in her expression. "Okay," she said, "but I need to finish wrapping these first. I have 4 more to do." "Take your time," Marcus said, standing up. "I'll go get the food. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Will you still be here?" She nodded, already focused back on her work. Marcus walked back into the hospital on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The bright fluorescent lights were jarring after the darkness of the alley. He moved through the empty corridors on autopilot, his mind 1,000 miles away. Not away. 2 years away. To a hospital room that looked just like the ones he worked in now, where Emma had held his hand and told him it was going to be okay, even as the machines around her screamed that it wasn't. Emma had been a social worker. She'd spent her entire career fighting for kids like Nora, kids who slipped through the cracks of a system that was supposed to protect them. She'd come home with stories that broke his heart and fired her up in equal measure. She'd believed, with a ferocity that Marcus had loved about her, that every child deserved a champion. And then she'd died, giving birth to their second child, a daughter who'd lived for only 17 minutes, long enough for Marcus to hold her, not long enough for anything else that mattered. Riley had been 4. He was 6 now, and Marcus had spent the last 2 years in survival mode, working double and triple shifts to pay off the mountain of medical debt that Emma's death had left behind. 17 minutes. That's what $250,000 in hospital bills bought you. 17 minutes and a gravestone that read, "Beloved wife and mother," next to a smaller stone that read, "Our angel, Grace." Marcus shook his head, forcing himself back to the present. He raided the cafeteria, grabbing sandwiches, fruit, a container of soup, some cookies. The night staff knew him and didn't ask questions. He shoved everything into a canvas bag and headed back out into the cold. Nora was still there. She'd finished wrapping her presents and had arranged them in a neat row, each one labeled with a name written in careful block letters on the newspaper. Tommy, Sarah, Miguel, Keisha, Dante. She was sitting with her back against the dumpster, her arms wrapped around her knees, shivering despite her earlier bravado about the warm air vent. "Ready?" Marcus asked. She stood up carefully, gathering her presents into a plastic shopping bag that had more holes than plastic. "Yes, sir." It's Marcus, and you don't have to call me sir." They walked to his car, an 8-year-old sedan that had seen better days. Nora walked beside him, silent but alert, carrying the food bag with both arms like it was precious cargo. When they reached the car, Marcus unlocked it and set the food in the passenger seat. He turned to find Nora still standing on the curb, not moving. "You can keep that food," she said, "for your son. I helped you carry it. That was the deal." "The deal," Marcus said slowly, "was that you'd help me carry it. And you did. But I never said you couldn't eat any of it." He pulled out a wrapped sandwich and a container of soup. "It's turkey and Swiss, and the soup is chicken noodle. Is that okay?" Nora stared at the food, and for the first time, her composure cracked. Her eyes welled up, but she blinked furiously, forcing the tears back. "I can't pay you." "I don't want you to pay me," Marcus said. "I want you to eat." She took the food with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus watched her devour the sandwich with a hunger that made his chest ache. When was the last time she'd eaten? Yesterday? The day before? He waited until she'd finished before speaking again. "Nora, where are you sleeping tonight?" She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I'll be fine." "That's not what I asked." She looked away. "The shelter has a curfew. If you're not back by 8, they lock the doors. And you weren't back by 8. I was working on the presents." "So where will you sleep?" Nora shrugged, a gesture of forced nonchalance that didn't fool Marcus for a second. "There's a spot, it's warm, it's fine." It was absolutely not fine. Marcus knew this. He also knew that he was standing at a crossroads. He could drive away, tell himself he'd done what he could, and let this child disappear back into the night. Or he could do something monumentally stupid and potentially illegal. He thought of Emma. He thought of Riley. He thought of Grace, who never got a chance to become anything at all. "Get in the car," he said. Nora's eyes widened. "What?" "Get in the car. You're not sleeping in the cold tonight." "I don't even know you." "My name is Marcus Reed. I'm 34 years old. I've been a nurse for 11 years. I have a son named Riley who's 6. I live in a small apartment about 20 minutes from here. I'm not perfect, but I'm not a monster. And I'm not letting you freeze to death in an alley on my watch." Nora stood there, every instinct she'd developed on the streets telling her not to trust this stranger. But something in Marcus's face, something in the exhausted honesty of his words made her hesitate. "Just for tonight?" she asked, her voice small. "Just for tonight," Marcus agreed, though something in his gut told him that was a lie. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Slowly, clutching her bag of wrapped trash like a lifeline, Nora climbed into the back seat of Marcus's car. As he drove through the empty streets toward his apartment, he caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. She was still awake, still wary, her eyes tracking every turn as if memorizing an escape route. "The presents," she said suddenly. "I need to get them to the shelter tomorrow." "We will," Marcus promised, "first thing in the morning." Nora nodded and finally closed her eyes. By the time Marcus pulled into his parking spot, she was asleep, her head resting against the window, the bag of gifts held tight against her chest. Marcus sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at this child who'd somehow walked into his life and upended it in the span of an hour. He had no idea what he was doing. He had no plan. All he knew was that a little girl who wrapped trash like it was treasure deserved better than the world had given her. And maybe, just maybe, he and Riley deserved a chance to be better than the grief that had been slowly drowning them for 2 years. Marcus gently opened the back door and carefully lifted Nora out of the car. She stirred but didn't wake, her trust in that moment of sleep more profound than any words could have been. He carried her inside, this stranger child, and laid her on the couch, covering her with the warmest blanket he owned. She curled into it immediately, sighing in her sleep. In the next room, Riley was sleeping in his small bed, surrounded by toys that Marcus had scraped together money to buy. Good toys. New toys. Toys that Riley barely played with because the joy had gone out of him when his mother died. Marcus stood in the doorway between the 2 rooms looking at his son, then at the girl on his couch, and he felt something he hadn't felt in 731 days. He felt like maybe tomorrow might be different. Morning came too quickly. Marcus woke to the smell of coffee, which was impossible because he'd forgotten to set the automatic timer on the coffee maker for at least 3 weeks. He stumbled out of his bedroom, his body protesting every movement after only 4 hours of sleep, and found Nora standing in his kitchen. She'd folded the blanket into a perfect square on the couch and was now studying his ancient coffee maker with the intense focus of a surgeon examining a patient. "The heating element is dying," she said without looking at him. "That's why it takes forever to brew and the coffee tastes burnt. You need to descale it with vinegar, but that'll only buy you maybe another month. After that, you'll need a new one." Marcus blinked, his brain struggling to catch up. "How do you know that?" "My second foster dad worked at an appliance repair shop," Nora said, finally turning to face him. "He wasn't very nice, but he knew his stuff. I paid attention." She paused, her expression guarded. "I made coffee. I hope that's okay. I didn't use much." "It's fine," Marcus said, though his mind was reeling. He'd expected to wake up and find her gone, a figment of his exhausted imagination. Instead, she was here, diagnosing his coffee maker. "Did you sleep okay?" "Better than I have in 3 weeks," she admitted, then seemed to regret the honesty. "Thank you for letting me stay. I'll get out of your way now. I need to get these presents to the shelter before noon." "Nora, wait." Marcus moved into the kitchen, pouring himself a cup of the coffee she'd made. It was, he had to admit, better than anything he'd managed to make in months. "Where have you been sleeping? Really?" She looked down at her hands. "I told you, I have a spot. The shelter locks the doors at 8. You said so yourself. So where have you been going after 8? The silence stretched between them. Marcus waited, not pushing, just letting the question hang in the air. Finally, Nora sighed, a sound far too world-weary for an 11-year-old. "There's a utility room in the basement of your hospital," she said quietly. "It's not locked, and there's a corner behind some old equipment where nobody goes. It's warm because the heating pipes run through there. I've been sleeping there." Marcus set his coffee down carefully, afraid that if he moved too quickly, he'd spook her into stopping. "For how long?" 3 weeks and 4 days. 3 weeks, Marcus repeated, his voice hollow. "You've been living in the hospital basement for 3 weeks. "It's not that bad," Nora said defensively. "There's a public bathroom on the first floor where I can wash up. I shower at the YMCA on Tuesdays and Thursdays because they have free swim for kids. I do my homework in the hospital library after school. And the cafeteria staff, they throw out so much food at the end of every shift. Perfectly good food. I just wait until they dump it, and then I—" "Stop," Marcus said, his voice cracking. He sat down heavily at his small kitchen table, his head in his hands. "Jesus Christ, Nora, you're 12 years old." 11, she corrected. "I won't be 12 until April." It was worse. Somehow that made it so much worse. "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why aren't you at Riverside? I thought you said the shelter—" "They have rules," Nora interrupted. "After you turn 11, you can't stay in the children's wing anymore. You move to the general population area. It's supposed to be safer, but it's not. There are people there who—" She stopped, her jaw clenching. "I'm small. People think I'm easy to push around. I'm not going back there." Marcus looked at this tiny, fierce girl standing in his kitchen, and he saw a survivor. Not a victim. A survivor. But surviving wasn't living, and he knew that better than most. "What about school?" he asked. "I go," she said quickly. "Every day. I haven't missed once. I'm in 6th grade at Roosevelt Middle. My grades are good. I do all my homework. I'm not stupid, and I'm not some delinquent. I just need a safe place to sleep until I can figure things out." "Figure things out," Marcus echoed. "You're 11 years old. You shouldn't have to figure things out." "Well, I do," Nora said, her voice rising slightly. "Because nobody else is going to do it for me. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked." The matter-of-fact despair in her voice broke something in Marcus. He thought about calling Child Protective Services. He thought about the proper channels, the right procedures, all the things a responsible adult was supposed to do. And then he thought about Nora being processed through a system that was so overwhelmed, so underfunded, that an 11-year-old girl could slip through its cracks and live in a hospital basement for 3 weeks without anyone noticing or caring. He thought about Emma, who'd spent her career fighting a system that chewed up kids and spat them out. He made a decision that was either the best or worst of his life. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "You're going to stay here. Not permanently, not yet. But we're going to figure out a real solution, a legal one. But that's going to take time, and in the meantime, you're not sleeping in a hospital basement. Nora stared at him. You can't just let me stay here. That's illegal. You'd get in trouble. Probably, Marcus admitted, but I'm getting really tired of doing the easy thing and watching it turn into the wrong thing. So we're going to do this carefully. My son Riley is going to wake up in about 20 minutes. I'm going to introduce you as a friend who needed a place to stay. He doesn't need to know the details. Nobody needs to know the details until I figure out how to make this official. You're serious, Nora said, disbelief and hope warring in her expression. Dead serious. But we have rules. You keep going to school. You keep your head down. You don't tell anyone where you're staying. And when I say we're going to find a legal solution, I mean it. I'm not running some kind of under-the-table foster home. This is temporary until I can figure out the right way to help you. Understood? Nora nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. Understood. Good. Now, I think I hear Riley waking up. The sound of small feet padding across the floor preceded Riley's appearance in the kitchen. He was 6 years old, with Marcus's dark eyes and Emma's gentle features, and he looked completely baffled to see a strange girl in their apartment. Daddy? Riley said, his voice still thick with sleep. Who's that? Riley, this is Nora, Marcus said, keeping his tone light. She's going to be staying with us for a little while. Nora, this is my son Riley. Riley regarded Nora with the intense scrutiny only children could manage. Are you a babysitter? No, Nora said, crouching down to his level. I'm more like a temporary roommate. Is that okay with you? Riley considered this. Do you know how to make pancakes? I can learn, Nora said seriously. Okay, Riley decided. You can stay. He looked at Marcus. Can I show her my robot? The one that doesn't work anymore? Marcus felt his throat tighten. The robot had been a gift from Emma, one of the last presents she'd given Riley before she died. It had broken months ago, and Marcus hadn't had the heart or the skill to fix it. Riley had stopped asking about it after a while. Sure, buddy, Marcus said. Go get it. Riley ran off to his room, returning moments later with the toy robot. It was a sophisticated piece of engineering, the kind that was supposed to walk and talk and respond to commands. Now it just sat lifeless in Riley's hands, a sad reminder of better times. Nora took it gently, examining it with that same focused intensity she'd given the coffee maker. The battery compartment is corroded, she said after a moment, and there's a loose wire here. And I think the main circuit board might have water damage. Do you have any tools? Screwdrivers, maybe some sandpaper, electrical tape? Marcus found himself nodding and retrieving his pathetic excuse for a toolbox. Nora spread a kitchen towel on the table and went to work. Riley watched her with rapt attention, and Marcus watched them both, marveling at how natural it seemed. Within 20 minutes, Nora had disassembled the robot, cleaned the corrosion with a vinegar-soaked cloth, reconnected the loose wiring, and put the whole thing back together. Try it now, she said, handing it to Riley. Riley pressed the power button, and the robot whirred to life. Its eyes lit up blue, and it took 3 mechanical steps across the table before speaking in its tinny electronic voice. Hello, friend. Let's play. Riley's face split into a grin so wide it looked like it might break his face. It works! Daddy, it works! She fixed it! I see that, Marcus said, his voice thick. That's amazing, Nora. It's not that hard, Nora said, but there was a small, pleased smile on her face. Things are usually fixable if you know what's broken. That morning, Marcus called in a favor with his supervisor and took a personal day, something he never did. He drove Nora to Riverside Shelter so she could deliver her carefully wrapped presents. The shelter director, a harried woman named Patricia, seemed genuinely touched by the gesture, but didn't question where Nora had been or where she was going. There were too many kids, too few resources, and Nora had clearly learned to be invisible when it suited her. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur that felt almost like normalcy. Nora kept her word. She went to school every day, returning to the apartment by 3:30. She'd help Riley with his homework, patiently explaining math concepts that Marcus barely remembered himself. She fixed things. The toaster that had been burning bread for months suddenly worked perfectly. The lamp in the living room that flickered constantly now provided steady light. Riley's toy cars, his action figures, even Marcus's ancient laptop that had been running slow, all got the Nora treatment and emerged better for it. She kept the apartment spotlessly clean, not in a servile way, but in a manner that suggested she needed the order to feel safe. She never wasted food. She never complained. She never asked for anything beyond the basics. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the apartment stopped feeling like a mausoleum of grief and started feeling like a home again. Marcus found himself leaving work on time for the first time in 2 years. He found himself looking forward to walking through his front door instead of dreading it. Riley laughed more. He played more. He talked about school and his friends and the robot that Nora had brought back to life. The shadow that had lived in his eyes since Emma's death began to lift, but Nora herself remained a mystery. She never talked about her past beyond the bare facts Marcus had extracted that first morning. When Riley asked about her parents, she'd deflect with a joke. When Marcus gently probed about her previous foster homes, she'd suddenly remember homework that needed finishing. She lived in the present with an intensity that suggested the past was too painful to revisit. Marcus noticed other things too. She flinched at loud noises. She always positioned herself with her back to a wall and her eyes on the exits. She hoarded food in her backpack, even though Marcus had assured her repeatedly that she could eat whenever she wanted. At night, she slept on the couch with her shoes on, as if ready to run at a moment's notice. One evening, after Riley had gone to bed, Marcus found Nora sitting at the kitchen table with her math homework spread in front of her. She was staring at a word problem, but not solving it. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, sitting down across from her. "Fine," she said automatically. "Nora, you can talk to me. You know that, right?" She looked up, her expression guarded. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me what happened. Why you ran from the last foster home. Why you're so afraid all the time." "I'm not afraid," she said, but her hands betrayed her, clenching into small fists on the table. "Everyone's afraid of something," Marcus said gently. "I'm afraid every single day. I'm afraid I'm going to fail Riley. I'm afraid I'm going to lose him the way I lost his mother and sister. I'm afraid that no matter how hard I work, it'll never be enough." Nora studied him, weighing his honesty. "The last home," she said slowly. "The dad there, he had rules, lots of rules. And if you broke them, even by accident, he'd make you pay. Not with hitting, not where people could see. But there are other ways to hurt people." Marcus felt rage kindle in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Did he hurt you?" "He tried," Nora said, lifting her chin with defiance. "But I'm smarter than he thought. I stole $40 from his wallet, broke the lock on the back window to make it look like a burglary, and ran. Let him explain that to his wife." Despite the horror of what she was describing, Marcus felt a flicker of admiration. This kid was a survivor. "That's why you can't go back into the system," Marcus said, understanding dawning. "You're afraid they'll send you back to him." "They won't," Nora said. "I made sure of that. I left evidence, letters he'd written, things he'd said. I mailed them to the state office before I left. He won't be fostering anyone ever again. But the system, it's broken, Marcus. There are 100 more just like him. And I'm tired of being sent places where people pretend to care until the check clears." She looked at him with those eyes that had seen too much. "You're different. I know that. But I also know this can't last. People like me don't get happy endings. We get survival. And I'm good at survival." Marcus reached across the table and gently placed his hand over her clenched fist. "What if I told you that you deserve more than survival? What if I told you I'm going to fight like hell to make this official and legal and permanent?" "I'd say you're naive," Nora whispered, "but I'd also say thank you." "Then you're welcome," Marcus said. "Now finish your math homework, and tomorrow we're going to talk to a lawyer, a good one, because you're right about one thing. This can't last the way it is, but not because you don't deserve it, because you deserve it to be real." For the first time since she'd walked into his life, Nora smiled. A real smile, not the practiced, polite version she showed the world. And in that moment, Marcus knew he was already too invested to turn back. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a good deed. This was family, messy and complicated and completely unauthorized, but family nonetheless. He just had to figure out how to make the rest of the world see it that way. The lawyer's office had been a disaster. Marcus sat in the parking lot afterward, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The consultation had lasted exactly 43 minutes, and every minute had been another nail in the coffin of his hope. "Mr. Reed," the lawyer had said, his tone professional but pitying, "I understand your intentions are good, but the reality is stark. You're a single father with significant medical debt. Your credit score reflects financial instability. You work irregular hours in a high-stress profession, and you've been housing a minor without legal authorization for 2 weeks. If you apply for emergency foster care now, the best-case scenario is a lengthy investigation. Worst case, they remove the child immediately and you face charges for harboring a runaway." "So what do I do?" Marcus had asked, desperation seeping into his voice. "You report her presence to Child Protective Services. You cooperate fully. You demonstrate that you were acting in good faith while trying to find proper placement. And then you let the system do its job." Let the system do its job. The system that had failed Nora so catastrophically that she'd chosen a hospital basement over its care. Marcus started the car and drove back to work for his evening shift, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on his chest like a physical thing. He was so lost in thought that he barely registered walking through the hospital's staff entrance, barely noticed the familiar faces of his colleagues. He changed into his scrubs mechanically, his mind churning through scenarios that all ended badly. "Reed." The voice cut through his fog like a scalpel. Cold, precise, utterly without warmth. Marcus turned to find Dr. Gerald Whitmore standing in the doorway of the staff locker room. Whitmore was 48 years old, impeccably dressed even in his white coat, with silver hair that looked like it had been styled with a ruler, and eyes that performed constant cost-benefit analyses on everything they surveyed. He'd been the hospital's director of operations for 3 years, and in that time, he'd transformed the emergency department from a patient-focused facility into what the nurses privately called the Profit Center. "Dr. Whitmore," Marcus said, his tone neutral. "You're on time today," Whitmore observed, checking his watch with theatrical precision. "That makes 5 days in a row. How unprecedented." Marcus said nothing, waiting for the real point of this visit. Whitmore never made small talk without an agenda. "I've been reviewing the staffing reports," Whitmore continued, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind him. "Your overtime hours have decreased by 62% over the past 2 weeks. Your shift extensions have dropped to 0, and yet our patient load has increased by 18% in the same period." "I complete my assigned shifts," Marcus said carefully. "I fulfill my contracted hours." "Your contracted minimum hours," Whitmore corrected, his voice sharpening. "But we both know this department relies on nurses who go above and beyond. Nurses who understand that patient care sometimes requires sacrifice." What Whitmore actually meant, Marcus knew, was that the department relied on nurses who would work themselves into the ground for no extra pay, covering staffing. Shortages that existed because Whitmore kept the payroll lean to hit his precious budget targets. Marcus had been that nurse for 2 years, using work as an anesthetic for his grief. But not anymore. "I have a son," Marcus said flatly. "He needs his father to be present, not just a ghost who sleeps 4 hours a night and works the rest." "How touching," Whitmore said, though his tone suggested he found it anything but. "Fatherhood has given you a new perspective. I suppose that also explains your recent pushback on the new triage protocols?" There it was. The real reason for this conversation. 2 weeks ago, Whitmore had implemented new efficiency measures that required nurses to process emergency patients through initial assessment in under 8 minutes, regardless of complexity. Patients who couldn't be stabilized in that window were to be moved to observation holding to free up ER beds for new arrivals. It looked good on paper, made the wait times appear shorter, but in practice, it was dangerous. Patients in observation holding received substandard care, and Marcus had witnessed 2 near disasters when seriously ill patients were moved too quickly. He'd filed a formal complaint with the hospital's patient safety committee, quietly, professionally, but he'd filed it. "The protocols are unsafe," Marcus said, meeting Whitmore's gaze without flinching. 3 other nurses agree. We've documented our concerns." "You've documented your opinions," Whitmore corrected. "Opinions that, I might add, come from staff members who seem to have forgotten that this hospital operates on thin margins." We're not a charity, Reed. We're a business. And businesses that don't control costs don't survive. Businesses that kill patients don't survive either. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Whitmore's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes turned to ice. "That's quite an accusation," he said softly. "I hope you have evidence to support such inflammatory language, because if you're making baseless claims about patient safety, that could be grounds for disciplinary action, possibly termination." It was a threat, a clear, unambiguous threat. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I have documentation," Marcus said. "Time-stamped patient records, incident reports, everything by the book." "By the book," Whitmore repeated, a thin smile crossing his face. "How admirable. I do hope your personal life is equally well documented and above board, Mr. Reed. It would be unfortunate if any irregularities there cast doubt on your professional judgment." The comment seemed random, but something in Whitmore's tone made Marcus's blood run cold. Did he know about Nora? He couldn't. There was no way. "My personal life is none of your concern," Marcus said. "Of course not," Whitmore agreed too easily. "I'm merely noting that the hospital takes a holistic view of its employees, professional conduct, personal stability. We need to know that our staff, especially those who challenge administrative decisions, have sound judgment in all areas of their lives." He let that hang in the air for a moment, then checked his watch again. "Your shift starts in 5 minutes. I suggest you don't be late. We're monitoring punctuality very closely these days." Whitmore left, and Marcus stood alone in the locker room, his heart pounding. That hadn't been a routine supervisor check-in. That had been a warning shot. Whitmore was watching him now, looking for any excuse to remove a problem employee. The shift was brutal. The ER was understaffed, as always, and the new protocols made everything worse. Marcus watched a woman with chest pain get moved to observation holding after 7 minutes, because the assessment wasn't conclusive enough. He intervened, ordering an EKG that revealed she was having a heart attack. She was rushed to surgery and survived, but if Marcus had followed Whitmore's protocols, she'd likely be dead. He filed another incident report. He knew it was painting a target on his back, but what else could he do? Let people die to keep his job? When his shift finally ended at 11, Marcus was exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness. He drove home on autopilot, his mind spinning through impossible problems. He needed to protect Nora. He needed to keep his job. He needed to fight a system that seemed designed to prevent him from doing either. He climbed the stairs to his apartment and found Nora waiting up, sitting at the kitchen table with Riley's homework spread out in front of her. She looked up when he entered, and her expression told him she'd been expecting bad news. "The lawyer said no, didn't he?" she asked quietly. Marcus slumped into the chair across from her. "It's complicated." "It's always complicated," Nora said, her voice flat. "That's what they say when the answer is no." "Nora, I should go," she interrupted, starting to gather the papers. "I shouldn't have stayed this long. I'm putting you at risk. I'm putting Riley at risk." "Stop," Marcus said firmly. "You're not going anywhere. I just need more time to figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out," Nora said, and there were tears in her eyes now, the first real tears he'd seen from her. "I'm a problem that doesn't have a solution. My mom died when I was 8. Did I tell you that? Cancer. Just like your wife, except my mom didn't have insurance and she waited too long to get treatment because she couldn't afford the hospital." Her voice was shaking, but she kept going, the words pouring out like a dam had broken. "I went into foster care the day after her funeral. 6 homes in 4 years, Marcus. 6. The first one was okay, but they moved out of state. The second one had 4 other kids, and I was just a number. The third one, the mom had a breakdown, and they pulled all of us out. The fourth one, the dad lost his job, and they couldn't keep me. The fifth one seemed good, but they were only in it for the monthly check, and when I got sick and needed medicine that cost extra, they sent me back. And the 6th one..." She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. "The 6th one was the one I told you about, the one I ran from. And you know what I learned through all of that? I learned that people say they want to help, but when it gets hard, when it costs something, they change their minds. every single time. "I'm not changing my mind," Marcus said fiercely. "You should," Nora whispered, "because I'm not worth losing your job over. I'm not worth losing Riley over. I'm just another foster kid who doesn't fit anywhere." Marcus stood up and moved around the table. He knelt down beside her chair, the same way he had that first night in the alley, making himself her level. "Listen to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are worth it. You are worth fighting for, and I'm going to find a way to make this work, legally and properly. It might take time, but I promise you, I will not give up. Do you understand?" Nora looked at him with those two old eyes, wanting desperately to believe him but afraid to hope. "You can't promise that. Watch me." The moment felt suspended in time, fragile and precious. Then Riley's voice called out from his bedroom, breaking the spell. "Daddy? Is Nora still here?" "Yeah, buddy," Marcus called back. "She's still here." "Good," Riley said, his voice sleepy. "Tell her good night for me." Nora wiped her eyes and managed a shaky smile. "He's a good kid." "He is," Marcus agreed. "And you're good for him. You're good for both of us." But even as he said the words, Marcus felt the weight of impossibility pressing down on him. How was he supposed to do this? He couldn't adopt her legally. He couldn't even foster her. His debt was too high, his income too modest, his situation too precarious. And now, Whitmore was circling like a shark that smelled blood in the water. What Marcus didn't know was that Whitmore had already set things in motion. 3 days later, a woman in a gray suit appeared at Marcus's apartment door at 6 in the evening. She introduced herself as Miss Evelyn Pruitt from Child Protective Services, and she held a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice clipped and officious, "I'm here to conduct an evaluation regarding a minor child reportedly residing at this address." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Who reported this?" "That information is confidential. May I come in?" He had no choice. He stepped aside and let her enter. Nora was at the kitchen table helping Riley with a science project, and when she saw Miss Pruitt, her face went pale. She knew exactly what this was. The evaluation was a nightmare. Miss Pruitt walked through the small apartment with the expression of someone inspecting a crime scene. She noted the cramped space. She questioned Marcus's work schedule. She asked Nora pointed questions in a tone that suggested the girl was a victim and Marcus was a predator. She examined the financial documents Marcus had hastily gathered, pursing her lips at the debt-to-income ratio. After 45 minutes, she delivered her verdict in the living room, her voice cold and final. "Mr. Reed, I appreciate that you may have had good intentions, but this arrangement is completely inappropriate. You are a single father with significant financial instability, working unpredictable hours in a high-stress job. You do not have legal authorization to care for this child. Frankly, your decision to house her without reporting her presence to authorities raises serious questions about your judgment." "I was trying to help her," Marcus said, his voice tight. "You were harboring a runaway minor," Miss Pruitt corrected. "There are proper channels for these situations. You should have contacted us immediately." "So you could put her back in the system that failed her?" Marcus challenged. "Back in the shelter where she wasn't safe?" "That is not your determination to make," Miss Pruitt snapped. "The system, while imperfect, has trained professionals in proper oversight. You are a nurse with no foster care training, no legal standing, and demonstrable financial problems. I am denying any potential application for emergency foster care, and I am requiring that Nora be returned to state custody immediately." "No," Nora said, her voice small but defiant. "Please, no." Miss Pruitt softened slightly, but not much. "Sweetheart, this is for your own safety. Mr. Reed cannot provide appropriate care." "He's provided better care than anyone in 4 years," Nora shot back, tears streaming down her face. "He sees me. He treats me like I matter. Please don't make me go back." "I'm sorry," Miss Pruitt said, and she actually did sound slightly sorry. "But this is not negotiable. I'll be back tomorrow at 10 in the morning with a placement officer. Nora will need to be ready to go." She left, and the apartment fell into a terrible silence. Riley was crying, not understanding what was happening, but sensing it was bad. Nora sat frozen, her face blank with shock, and Marcus felt something inside him shatter. He'd made a promise, and he was about to break it. That night, After Riley and Nora had finally fallen asleep, Marcus stood at his kitchen window, staring out at the city lights and trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Someone had reported them, someone who knew. But who? He thought back to Whitmore's veiled comments, the emphasis on personal stability, the implication that Marcus's life would be scrutinized. And then he knew. Whitmore had done this. He'd been watching Marcus, had followed him, or had someone else do it. And when he'd seen Nora, he'd seen an opportunity, a way to remove a troublesome employee who dared to question his protocols. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for the hospital's HR department. He'd file a complaint. He'd expose what Whitmore had done. He stopped. Who would believe him? He had no proof. And Whitmore was untouchable, a senior administrator with the board's full support. Any accusation Marcus made would look like retaliation from a disgruntled employee who'd been caught doing something illegal. He was trapped. Completely and utterly trapped. Marcus looked back at the couch where Nora slept, curled into a tight ball even in sleep, preparing for the worst. He thought about Riley's face when he realized Nora was leaving. He thought about Emma, who'd given her life trying to fix a broken system. And he made a decision. He didn't know how yet, but he was going to find a way, not through proper channels, not through lawyers and social workers and administrators who saw children as case numbers and problems to be managed. He was going to fight, not for permission, for justice. Marcus woke to the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment, not the usual shuffle of neighbors heading to work, but purposeful, authoritative steps that made his heart seize in his chest. He checked his phone. 7:42 in the morning. Christmas Eve. Miss Pruitt wasn't supposed to come until 10. The knock on the door was sharp and official. 3 hard raps that seemed to echo through the small apartment like gunshots. Marcus threw on a shirt and moved toward the door, his mind already racing ahead to disaster scenarios. Through the peephole, he saw Miss Pruitt, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 2 police officers in uniform and another man in a suit who had Social Services Supervisor written all over him. This wasn't a pickup. This was a raid. Marcus opened the door, positioning his body to block the view inside. "Miss Pruitt, you said 10 o'clock. "Plans changed," said the man in the suit, stepping forward. He was in his 50s, with iron gray hair and the expression of someone who'd seen every excuse and believed none of them. "I'm Supervisor Richard Chen from Child Protective Services. We have a court order for the immediate removal of the minor child Nora Catherine Bennett from these premises." He held up an official-looking document. Marcus's eyes caught phrases like emergency protective custody and unlicensed placement and potential endangerment. "She's not in danger here," Marcus said, hearing the desperation in his own voice. "She's safe. She's happy. You can see that if you just—" "Mr. Reed," interrupted one of the police officers, a stocky sergeant with a nameplate that read Kowalski. "We need you to step aside and allow us to execute this order. You can cooperate, or we can make this difficult. Your choice." It wasn't a choice. Marcus stepped back, and the bureaucratic machine rolled into his home like an occupying force. Riley appeared in the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. When he saw the police officers, his face crumpled in fear. "Daddy?" "It's okay, buddy," Marcus lied, moving to scoop his son up. "Go back to your room for a minute, okay?" But Riley had already seen Nora. She'd emerged from the bathroom, dressed in the clothes she'd been wearing the day Marcus found her, her backpack clutched to her chest. Her face was blank, resigned, like she'd always known this moment was coming and had been preparing for it her entire life. "Nora," Riley's voice cracked. "Where are you going?" "I have to leave, Riley," Nora said, her voice eerily calm, "but it's going to be okay." "No," Riley said, starting to cry. "No, you can't leave. Tell them, Daddy. Tell them she has to stay." Miss Pruitt moved toward Nora with practiced efficiency. "Come on, sweetheart. We have a nice placement waiting for you. A safe place with professionals who can help." "I don't want a safe place," Nora said quietly. "I want to stay here." "That's not possible," Supervisor Chen said, not unkindly. "Mr. Reed is not authorized to care for you. This situation was always temporary." Marcus watched helplessly as Miss Pruitt guided Nora toward the door. Nora didn't resist. She'd been through this before, he realized. She knew that fighting made it worse, but Riley didn't know that. He pulled away from Marcus and ran to Nora, wrapping his small arms around her waist. "Don't go! Please don't go!" "Riley, let go," Kowalski said firmly. "No, she's my friend. The bad people can't take her." "Riley," Marcus said, his voice breaking as he gently pulled his son away. "Let her go, buddy. We don't have a choice." Nora turned back one last time as they led her through the door. Her eyes met Marcus's, and in them he saw not accusation, but something worse. Understanding. She'd known he'd fail her. They all did, eventually. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, but the door was already closing. Riley's sobs filled the apartment, a sound of pure, uncomprehending grief. Marcus held his son and felt like the biggest failure in the world. He'd made a promise, he'd broken it. And now, a little girl who'd already lost everything was being processed back into a system that would chew her up and spit her out. Supervisor Chen had stayed behind. He handed Marcus a sheaf of papers. "These are official notifications. You are prohibited from contacting Nora Bennett through any means. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. You should also be aware that the state's attorney is reviewing potential charges of child endangerment and harboring a runaway minor. I strongly suggest you retain legal counsel." "She wasn't in danger," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "That's not how the law sees it," Chen replied. "You may have meant well, Mr. Reed, but good intentions don't supersede legal requirements. A child's safety requires proper oversight, documentation, and professional support systems. You provided none of those things." He left, and Marcus stood in his apartment holding his sobbing son, surrounded by the ghost of Nora's presence. Her backpack was gone, but she'd left behind the little things she'd fixed: the toaster, the lamp, Riley's robot still sitting on the shelf, its blue eyes dark now because Riley had turned it off after she'd fixed it, wanting to save the batteries for when she could play with him again. She wasn't coming back. Marcus called in sick to his shift that evening. He couldn't face the hospital, couldn't face Whitmore, couldn't face the pretense that life was normal when everything had just imploded. He spent Christmas Eve trying to comfort Riley, who kept asking when Nora was coming home, not understanding that home wasn't a place she was allowed to have. By Christmas morning, Riley had stopped asking. He opened his presents with mechanical politeness, not joy, and Marcus saw his son retreating back into the shell he'd inhabited after Emma died. All the progress of the last 2 weeks, all the laughter and light that Nora had brought back into their lives, was evaporating like morning frost. That afternoon, Marcus's phone rang. The hospital. He almost didn't answer, but professional habit made him pick up. "Reed," said a clipped voice he recognized immediately. "This is Dr. Whitmore. I need you to come in for a meeting tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp, my office." "It's Christmas," Marcus said dully, "and you called in sick on Christmas Eve, leaving us short-staffed during one of our busiest nights of the year. This meeting is non-negotiable. Don't be late." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, and something inside him shifted. Grief was giving way to rage, cold and clarifying. Whitmore had done this. He'd weaponized the system against Nora to punish Marcus for pushing back on his protocols. A child's life had become collateral damage in a bureaucratic power play. Marcus arrived at the hospital the next morning with nothing left to lose. He walked through the empty corridors, past the maintenance staff cleaning up after the holiday rush, straight to the administrative wing where Whitmore's office occupied a corner with windows overlooking the city. Whitmore was at his desk, working through a stack of paperwork with the same mechanical efficiency he brought to everything. He looked up when Marcus entered and gestured to a chair with false cordiality. "Reed, good of you to come." "Let's skip the pleasantries," Marcus said, remaining standing. "You reported Nora to CPS. You're the one who told them I was harboring her." Whitmore set down his pen with deliberate care. "I reported a concerning situation involving one of my employees. It's my responsibility to ensure that hospital staff maintain appropriate professional and personal standards." "She was 11 years old, living in a hospital basement," Marcus said, his voice rising. "I gave her a safe place to sleep. I was trying to help her." "You were breaking the law," Whitmore corrected, "and more importantly, you were distracted. Your little rescue mission was affecting your work, your pushback on necessary operational improvements, your refusal to take on additional shifts. I did what was best for this hospital." You destroyed a child's life to prove a point. I protected this institution from liability, Whitmore said, his voice hardening. You're a nurse, Reed. A good one, I'll admit. But you're not a social worker. You're not trained in foster care. You're a single father with crippling debt and a savior complex. That girl needed professional help, not some misguided rescue attempt by an overworked nurse who can't even keep his own life together. Marcus felt something snap inside him. 2 years of grief, 2 weeks of hope, and 1 morning of devastating loss all collided into a single point of white-hot fury. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides, grabbed Whitmore by his perfectly pressed collar, and shoved him hard against the bookshelf behind his desk. Her name is Nora, Marcus growled. Not that girl, not liability, Nora. And she mattered more than your budget targets and your promotion prospects and your goddamn operational efficiency. Whitmore's eyes went wide with shock, then narrowed with calculation. Let go of me. Now. Marcus released him, stepping back as the reality of what he'd just done crashed over him. Whitmore straightened his collar, his face flushed but his voice terrifyingly calm. That was assault, Reed. Witnessed by security cameras and documented in a hospital with full video surveillance. He gestured to the discreet camera in the corner of his office. Consider yourself suspended pending investigation. Leave your badge with HR on your way out. We'll be in touch regarding disciplinary proceedings and possible criminal charges. You bastard, Marcus whispered. I'm the bastard who follows the rules, Whitmore said coldly. You're the one who thought he was above them. Now get out of my office before I call security to remove you. Marcus left. He turned in his badge to a sympathetic HR clerk who wouldn't meet his eyes. He walked out of the hospital where he'd worked for 11 years, where Emma had died, where he'd tried to build something meaningful from the wreckage of his life. And now that was gone too. He drove home in a daze, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. No job. No way to get Nora back. Potential criminal charges hanging over his head. He'd tried to do the right thing, and it had cost him everything. When he walked into his apartment, Riley was sitting on the floor in front of the couch, surrounded by Nora's wrapped presents. The ones she'd made that first night when Marcus had found her behind the dumpster. She'd left them behind in her rush, or maybe she'd left them intentionally. One last gift for the kids at the shelter who would never receive them now. Riley was carefully unwrapping one, a broken doll that Nora had promised to fix. He looked up at Marcus with red-rimmed eyes. Daddy, I've been thinking. Marcus sat down heavily beside his son. About what, buddy? About Mommy, Riley said. Remember how she used to say when things are broken, you fix them? Marcus felt his throat tighten. I remember. Nora fixes broken things, Riley continued, his childish logic cutting through the fog of Marcus's despair with painful clarity. She fixed my robot, she fixed the toaster, she fixed us when we were sad. But now Nora's the one who's broken, and nobody's fixing her. He looked at his father with Emma's eyes. Maybe we need to fix this for her, Daddy. Maybe we need to fix the thing that's breaking all the kids. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes, Emma used to say. Riley was right. He'd been approaching this all wrong. He'd been trying to prove he was worthy of Nora, trying to convince social workers and lawyers and administrators that he was stable enough, financially secure enough, responsible enough to care for one child. But that wasn't the battle he needed to fight. The battle wasn't about him. It was about a system that was so broken, so overwhelmed, so trapped in bureaucracy that it let children slip through the cracks. A system that valued paperwork over people, protocol over protection. A system that had failed Nora 6 times and would fail hundreds more unless someone shone a light on it. Marcus pulled out his phone and began searching. Local news stations, investigative reporters, anyone who specialized in exposing systemic failures. He needed someone who could tell Nora's story, not as a sob story about a runaway kid, but as an indictment of everything that had let her fall so far, that living in a hospital basement seemed like her best option. He found a name, Cassidy Tran, an investigative journalist for the city's largest newspaper who'd won awards for her series on foster care failures. Her articles had led to 2 state investigations, and the removal of 3 negligent administrators. Marcus pulled up her contact information and began typing an email. His hands were steady now, his mind clear. He wasn't fighting for permission anymore. He was fighting for justice, and if he was going down, he was going to make sure the whole broken system came down with him. The email to Cassidy Tran was sent at 2:17 in the morning on December 26th. Marcus had spent hours writing it, deleting it, rewriting it, trying to find the words that would make a stranger care about a girl she'd never met. In the end, he'd simply told the truth. All of it. Nora's story, his story, Whitmore's calculated cruelty, the system's catastrophic failures. He attached everything he had: photos of Nora's wrapped presence, documentation of his attempts to legally foster her, the lawyer's rejection, Miss Pruitt's evaluation, even security footage timestamps showing the pattern of Whitmore's surveillance. He hit send and sat in the dark kitchen, waiting for nothing because what else was there to do? The response came 6 hours later. Marcus was making breakfast for Riley, going through the motions of normalcy while his world crumbled around him, when his phone buzzed. "Mr. Reed, this is Cassidy Tran. I read your email 3 times. I need to meet with you today. How soon can you get to the Riverside Diner on 4th Street? They met at noon. Cassidy was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a weathered notebook that had clearly seen 1,000 stories. She ordered coffee, pulled out a digital recorder, and got straight to business. "Tell me about Nora," she said. "Not the facts, the person. Who is she?" For the next 2 hours, Marcus talked. He told Cassidy about finding Nora behind the dumpster, about her meticulous dignity as she wrapped garbage like treasures. He told her about Riley's robot coming back to life in her hands, about the way she'd transformed their apartment from a mausoleum into a home, about her fierce intelligence and her bone-deep fear of trusting anyone because trust had always betrayed her. Cassidy listened, taking notes, occasionally asking questions that showed she understood the deeper story beneath the surface details. "And Whitmore?" she asked. "You're certain he's the one who reported you?" "He as good as admitted it," Marcus said, "but I can't prove it. The report was anonymous." "Anonymous reports leave digital trails," Cassidy said, a predatory gleam in her eye. "Give me 2 days," she delivered in one. The next afternoon, Cassidy called Marcus with a tremor of excitement in her voice. "Whitmore's a serial reporter. I pulled records through a Freedom of Information request and cross-referenced them with hospital employment records. In the last 3 years, he's filed 4 anonymous reports to various authorities about hospital employees. A pediatric nurse who criticized his medication dispensing protocols got reported to the state nursing board for a minor charting error. A physical therapist who pushed back on reduced session times got reported to OSHA for a safety violation that was technically true but completely inconsequential. An ER doctor who challenged his budget cuts got reported to the DEA for allegedly overprescribing pain medication. All anonymous, all strategically timed to coincide with professional disputes, all targeting people who stood in his way. Marcus felt vindication and rage in equal measure. "Can you prove it?" "I can prove the pattern," Cassidy said, "and patterns tell stories. But there's more. I've been digging into the foster care system in this city, and Marcus, it's worse than you know. There are currently 347 children in emergency placements. The system is designed to handle maybe 200. Caseworkers are managing triple their recommended loads. Background checks are being fast-tracked, follow-up visits are being skipped, and kids, especially older kids like Nora, are being cycled through so quickly that nobody's tracking outcomes." She paused and her voice softened. "I found Nora's file. 6 placements in 4 years, just like she told you. But what she didn't tell you is that in 3 of those homes, other children had filed complaints before her. The system knew those placements were problematic, and they sent her anyway because they had nowhere else to put her." Marcus closed his eyes, grief and fury warring in his chest. "So what do we do?" "We tell the truth," Cassidy said simply. "We tell Nora's story. We tell your story. We expose Whitmore and the system that enabled him, and we make people care." The article ran on Christmas Day. The headline read, The Girl Who Wrapped Trash: How One Child's Dignity Exposed a Broken System. Cassidy had written it with devastating precision. She opened with the image of 11-year-old Nora behind a dumpster on the coldest night of December, wrapping garbage with the care most people reserved for jewels, and she built from there. She detailed Nora's journey through 6 failed foster homes. She exposed the systemic failures that had let a child live in a hospital basement for 3 weeks without intervention. She laid out Marcus's attempts to help and the bureaucratic brick wall he'd hit at every turn. And then she turned her attention to Dr. Gerald Whitmore. She didn't accuse him directly. She didn't have to. She simply presented the facts. 4 anonymous reports, 4 employees who'd challenged his policies, 4 professional lives disrupted. She interviewed 2 of the other targets, who confirmed the pattern and spoke about a culture of fear and retaliation at the hospital. The article ended with a question. If a nurse who tried to help is punished while administrators who ignore suffering are rewarded, what does that say about the system we've built? And how many more children like Nora are we failing right now? The response was immediate and overwhelming. By noon on Christmas Day, the article had been shared 14,000 times on social media. By evening, it had been picked up by 3 national news networks. By the next morning, it was trending nationwide with the hashtag Nora's Story, and the mayor's office had issued a statement promising a full investigation into the city's foster care system. Marcus's phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Advocacy groups wanted to help. Lawyers offered pro bono services. The hospital's board of directors issued a terse statement announcing that Dr. Whitmore had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. But the call that mattered came on December 28th. A woman named Angela Chen from Child Protective Services asked if she could visit his apartment that afternoon. Marcus's first instinct was panic, but something in her voice was different from Miss Pruitt's cold, bureaucratic tone. There was warmth there. Humanity. I read the article, Angela said when she arrived. I've worked for CPS for 16 years, and I can tell you that Miss Pruitt handled this case exactly the way we're trained to handle it. By the book, according to protocol. But sometimes the book is wrong. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes and the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who cared more about substance than presentation. She asked to see the apartment, and Marcus showed her everything. The small space that Miss Pruitt had deemed inadequate, the couch where Nora had slept, the corner where she'd kept her few belongings. "Where's your son?" Angela asked. "Riley's room," Marcus said, gesturing down the hall. "He's been drawing. It's how he processes things." "May I see?" They found Riley on his floor, surrounded by drawings, dozens of them. Pictures of Nora fixing his robot, Nora laughing at the kitchen table, Nora, Riley, and Marcus holding hands. At the center of the collection was a larger drawing, more elaborate than the rest. It showed their apartment with a big heart drawn around it, and inside the heart were 3 stick figures labeled Daddy, Riley, and Nora. Above it, in careful block letters, Riley had written, "My family." Angela knelt down beside Riley, studying the drawings with genuine interest. "These are beautiful," she said softly. "You must miss her very much." Riley nodded, not looking up. "She's my friend. The bad people took her away." "I'm one of those people," Angela said gently, "and I'm very sorry. We thought we were protecting you, but sometimes grown-ups make mistakes." Riley finally looked at her, his eyes wary but hopeful. "Can you bring her back?" "I'm going to try," Angela promised. She spent 3 hours in the apartment. She looked at the things Nora had fixed. She reviewed the documentation Marcus had compiled. She asked questions, not aggressive interrogations like Miss Pruitt, but genuine inquiries meant to understand. She listened to Riley talk about Nora with the unfiltered honesty of a 6-year-old, and when she finally prepared to leave, she placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "The system failed this child," Angela said quietly, "multiple times, and when you tried to catch her, we punished you for it. That's not justice, that's not protection, that's just bureaucracy protecting itself." "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, afraid to hope. "Now I file a report recommending that Nora be placed back in your care under emergency foster provisions while we expedite your formal foster parent application. It won't be instant, Marcus. There will be home studies, training requirements, regular check-ins. But I'm going to fight for this. That little girl deserves a chance, and frankly, so do you. 3 months later, on a warm evening in late March, Marcus stood in the kitchen of his small apartment watching Nora fix a bicycle. Someone from the neighborhood had donated it after reading about her story, but the chain was rusted and the brakes were shot. Nora had it upside down on the living room floor, her hands black with grease, her face set in concentration. Riley sat beside her, handing her tools with the seriousness of a surgical assistant. "Wrench," Nora would say, and Riley would solemnly hand her the wrench. "Screwdriver," and the screwdriver would appear. The last 3 months had been a whirlwind. Whitmore had quietly resigned 2 weeks after the article ran, accepting a golden parachute severance package in exchange for not fighting the hospital's findings of administrative irregularities. The hospital's board had issued a formal apology to Marcus and reinstated him with full back pay. More importantly, they'd implemented new patient safety protocols and created an oversight committee to review administrative decisions. The state had launched a comprehensive audit of the foster care system. 6 administrators had been removed. Funding had been increased. Caseworker loads had been reduced. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was movement in the right direction. And Nora had come home. The formal foster placement had been approved 6 weeks ago, with a clear path to adoption outlined in the paperwork. Angela Chen had been true to her word, fighting through every layer of bureaucracy to make it happen. There had been home studies and background checks and hours of interviews. There had been mandatory training sessions on trauma-informed care and legal guardianship. There had been so much paperwork that Marcus had started to wonder if the system was just trying to bury him in forms. But in the end, they'd said yes. Nora looked up from the bicycle, a streak of grease across her cheek and a satisfied smile on her face. "Done. Want to test it?" "Race you outside," Riley said, already grabbing his own small bike from the corner. They trooped down the stairs and out into the mild evening air. The neighborhood was alive with the sounds of early spring, children playing, music drifting from open windows, the smell of someone grilling dinner. Nora climbed onto the repaired bicycle and took a few tentative pedals. The chain moved smoothly, the brakes responded perfectly, and she let out a laugh of pure joy. "It works!" Riley cheered and climbed onto his own bike. They began riding in circles in the parking lot, their laughter echoing off the buildings. Marcus watched them, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Looking good out there," he called. Nora circled back to him, slightly breathless. She'd put on weight over the last 3 months. Her face had filled out, losing the sharp angles of hunger. Her hair was clean and trimmed. She wore clothes that fit, shoes without holes. But more than the physical changes, there was something different in her eyes. The wariness was still there, probably always would be, but beneath it was something new. Trust, belonging, home. She looked up at Marcus, and for a long moment, she just studied his face like she was memorizing it. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up, for fighting, for everything." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "You don't have to thank me, Nora. Your family." She bit her lip, struggling with something. Then she took a deep breath and said the word she'd been practicing for weeks, but had been too afraid to use. "Thanks, Dad." The word hung in the air between them, precious and fragile and perfect. Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. He knelt down and pulled her into a hug, and she wrapped her thin arms around his neck and held on tight. "I love you, kiddo," Marcus whispered. "I'm so glad you're here." "I love you too," Nora whispered back, and he knew she meant it. Riley pedaled over, impatient with the emotional moment. "Come on, let's go to the park. You said we could ride to the park." Marcus laughed and wiped his eyes. "You're right. Let's go." They set off down the sidewalk, Nora on her repaired bicycle, Riley on his small one, Marcus jogging behind them to keep up. They wove through the neighborhood streets, 3 pieces of a puzzle that hadn't known they fit together until they'd tried. The spring evening was golden and perfect, the kind of moment that felt like a gift. Emma would have loved this, Marcus thought. She would have loved Nora's fierce determination and Riley's innocent joy. She would have loved watching this strange, unlikely family take shape from the wreckage of loss and grief. He felt her presence like a gentle hand on his shoulder, guiding him forward. Faster, Dad, Nora called back, grinning. You're falling behind. I'm coming, Marcus called, picking up his pace. They rode until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They rode until Riley complained that his legs were tired and Nora's cheeks were flushed from exercise and laughter. They rode until the streetlights began to flicker on, marking the end of one perfect day and the beginning of all the days to come. When they finally returned home, tired and happy, Marcus tucked Riley into bed and then found Nora sitting at the kitchen table with her homework spread out in front of her. Some things never changed. She was already back to her routine, determined to keep her grades up, to prove she was worth the chance she'd been given. You know you don't have to be perfect, right? Marcus said, sitting down across from her. You're allowed to just be a kid sometimes. Nora looked up, a small smile playing at her lips. I know, but I want to be. Not perfect, I mean. Just good. The best version of myself. Because you believed in me when nobody else did. And I don't want to let you down. You could never let me down, Marcus said firmly. You showed up in my life, wrapping trash like it was treasure, and you taught me that dignity and worth don't come from circumstances. They come from inside. You're extraordinary, Nora. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are. She ducked her head, embarrassed but pleased. You're pretty extraordinary too, Dad. The word still sent a thrill through his heart every time she used it. That night, after Nora had gone to sleep and the apartment was quiet, Marcus stood at the window looking out at the city. He thought about the journey that had led him here. Emma's death, the crushing grief, the lonely years of just surviving, finding Nora behind a dumpster on the coldest night of December, the fight to keep her, the system that had tried to tear them apart, and the unexpected victory that had brought them back together. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unlikely packages. Sometimes they come wrapped in newspaper behind a dumpster, held together with duct tape and desperate hope. Sometimes they come in the form of a broken child who teaches you that broken things can be fixed, that families can be built from strangers, that love doesn't require biology or paperwork or permission. It just requires showing up, fighting, believing. Marcus pulled out his phone and found the article that had started everything. Cassidy's piece had sparked a movement. Foster care reform legislation was pending in the state Congress. Hospitals across the country had reviewed their whistleblower policies, and hundreds of families had reached out, offering to foster, offering to help, offering to be the safety net for children falling through the cracks. One story had changed the trajectory of countless lives. He typed a message to Cassidy. She called me Dad today. Thank you for giving us a chance. The response came quickly. You gave each other a chance. I just told people about it. How's she doing? She's home, Marcus typed back. Finally, she's home. And she was. They all were. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this story from? Drop a comment and let us know, because your presence here means more than you know. And if you can, share one word that describes how this story made you feel. Every word, every comment, every share helps stories like Nora's reach people who need to hear them. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that broken things can be fixed and that families come in all forms, please consider subscribing. There are so many more stories waiting to be told, stories about courage and hope and the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unlikely packages, and sometimes the family you need is the one you choose. Stay brave, stay kind, and never stop fighting for what matters.